Okay, so this is my review of Defending Jacob, Episode 4, Damage Control. This is, like the whole series is, written by Mark Baumbach and directed by Morton Tildum. So this episode really deals with a lot thematically. I think what it's really opening up into is that when a family goes through some sort of tragedy, that everything they might have just put in the back of their mind is now comes to the front, and you're facing things you could compartmentalize and not address, and that often so happens in real life. And this episode really dives into Laurie's mindset and her facing the fears she's always had about her husband and of her son, and the result of Andy not sharing ever to her the true history of his father. So we'll get more into that, but let's start breaking down scene by scene. We get actually a really good first scene here where Cherry Jones, who plays the lawyer, Joanna, has a intense scene where she's pretty much priming and getting Jacob ready for what he's going to face in a trial. Just calling him out for his inconsistencies in his story, and you clearly see that Jacob is not ready to say this story without looking pretty guilty. And to Joanna, that means not having him take the stand, which he takes as advice from Andy. But when they go outside after, Andy actually suggests that he should eventually take the stand because the jury always wants a good story. And he thinks that story can be this child predator that he's obsessed with getting, Leonard Pat. It's so interesting how this episode really shows on Andy's side of things how he's getting into crazy mode now, doing anything necessary to keep his son from going to jail, and he might not be thinking totally rational in these moments, which is scary because we see in the future scenes when he's in trial, he looks completely crushed, and clearly a lot of stuff is going to go wrong here. It's interesting too when Joanna's talking to Jacob because she keeps bringing up Derek and how Derek said Jacob looked clean that day and that he was in a good mood. And it's just going to add to this little theory they're planting in this episode that maybe Derek did the murder and that maybe he's setting up Jacob in a way. And Joanna also says to Andy at the end here for him to tread carefully with this Leonard Pat's case, clearly foreshadowing he's not going to tread carefully. And then she even says if you get approached by anyone in the press, don't talk. But this foreshadows later on that Laurie will get approached by a writer and will talk. Not knowingly, of course. So you're just seeing they're making a lot of bad steps here. Now, Michelle Dockery is playing this role beautifully. I think this is the best I've ever seen with her acting. She's really bringing her A game. You see this at the dinner scene where they're trying to just have a normal family dinner, but they can't actually go out because people stare at them. It's really sad to watch, and Michelle Dockery just does a great job of showing that pain in her face, and you really feel the worst for her. She's the most human character of the family. You see this when she says to Jacob, tell me what to do. I don't know what even to do as a parent in this situation. It was just delivered so well and just, again, so real. All the acting in the show is very realistic, which I really appreciate. But speaking of being shady and more missteps is Laurie getting in the mail under an alias of Agnes Martin all the info about Andy's father, which we see it then cuts to the future trial situation with Andy and the prosecutors bringing up that she did this. We also learn that the father raped the girl he killed, and now the lawyer's coming hard at Andy, bringing up that she didn't know about any of this. And he's like, it must have been shocking to find out that your father was Bloody Billy Barber. So pretty juicy stuff here, but then as all this momentum's going in the episode, why do they do this where they cut to this flashback sequence of Andy as a kid with his dad visiting him in prison, and he's got the yellow teeth, and they give him like this demonic slowed down voice in the background, and he's like, look at me. Why? It's just this comic book villain they make him for a second. It's just completely out of tone of the whole show. I don't know who approves of scenes like this. I never understand that. And what's interesting now is when we see Laurie in bed with Andy, she asks him, is there a tiny part of you that thinks he did it? Meaning Jacob. And Andy says, of course not. So at this point in the story, more and more Laurie is leaning towards that her son is a murderer. The difference between her and Andy is Andy has a really good job of just compartmentalizing a little thought like about what happened with his father and just acting like it never happened and putting it away. And he's doing that with the thought of maybe Andy's being guilty and just focusing on proving his innocence, where Laurie is someone who's a little more rational and sees both sides to a situation. And I want to jump to their other scene where they're in bed together, and this is shown again because Laurie's reaction to hearing that Derek might have done this isn't that the same thing people are saying about Jacob? Can look outside of herself and realize, aren't we being hypocrites then? We know the pain this causes. Why would we do that to somebody else's child? Where again, Andy can just block that out and do what's best for his son. And this happens again when he reacts to Laurie, who says, Isn't that Joanne's job at all the things he wants to do himself? And he's like, I'm taking it to my own hands. And he literally says whatever it takes. So he's so made his decision. Like he says in the future trial scene later on, that he already made that decision years ago that he wasn't a murderer himself and his son wasn't either. He makes his choice and he goes with it. Did I like to use the line, whatever it takes? No. Because they're clearly doing that because it's the famous tagline from Avengers Endgame with Chris Evans as Captain America. I hate when shows take you out of it for a second doing that. They know it will get someone to tweet about it and go, oh my God, he said whatever it takes. And they even use it in the episode again when Laurie says it. Just annoying. I don't like when businessy decisions get involved with an actual script. And you can't ignore that. You can't act like Chris Evans saying that line was just a coincidence or that they didn't know writing that. They're choosing to have the distracting line, which I don't understand. Well, I do, because it's promotional reasons. More people will talk about it. So there was a little bit of these odd sequences in this episode with Andy going rogue here. And when he goes to this kid, Matt, who was a victim of Leonard Patz, so we think that he was groped in the balls in the library, but Andy doesn't care, calls him out, says, no way were you in a library. Were you his drug dealer? Were you his lover? Why would he risk touching someone who could beat the crap out of him? I think what was just throwing me off in the scene is that the kid was just super ghetto. I don't know why. I just thought the whole scene was weird, but I guess it works. And you see Andy's just going down this rabbit hole. He follows Leonard Patz's obsession here of that he's the way out for Jacob and that he follows him from the hardware store to his house. Are we seeing everything that's going to bite the barbers in the butt by Andy doing this? Or is he going to save Jacob? We'll see. And poor Jacob, man, he's getting like these tests done on him to see if he's a psycho, basically. Looking at images and them reading his pulse and how he reacts to them. How does that not mess someone up even more? It's like they do these tests, but they don't think of the consequences of how he would think of himself having to go through it. But when he's seeing these different images of like murder and then just something that's good, like a kid in a swing, it just seamlessly transitions to a painting that Laurie is looking at. I really love the editing in this show, and it really showed off well here. Obviously, good editing is when you don't notice it, and they do it so well where you're just like, whoa, like just in another scene all of a sudden. So props to the editor here. And then going down this pain and suffering you feel through Laurie, that she gets a notification about the spring gala she would have been going to before all this. She goes to see it, watching from afar as a spectator and just looking at the life she no longer has. All her friends that just left her. And she tells Andy that she was actually asked to dinner by Kara, and he's like, oh, really? Meaning like, oh, you guys are cool now. But that's not the case. But it makes me wonder, the more she's realizing how distant her husband is and not opening up to her, is she going to lean towards opening up about all this to someone like Kara and go against her husband in a sense? That could be very interesting. And then she eats alone at the diner and she makes a new friend. But turns out this friend is a writer. She opened up all to her. She even gave her fries. And she got some big quotes from Laurie here. My husband says I shouldn't care about losing friends, but he has never really had them. And she's like, maybe I was the only one. But even with me, she says, alluding to that she doesn't really feel like she knows him. And this also alludes to him not really having friends. This was hinted at last episode when he goes and visits Duffy, and she's like, you think we're friends? And he's like, yeah, I thought that's what friends were, which is also kind of sad. And she was hard on him there, but still, they've been kind of planting the seed for that with Andy, that he's a loner, and he's a lot like his son, more than you would think at first. And the gall of this writer here to say, is there anything you had said you want to keep off the record? Too bad Laurie didn't just scream all of it. So when Andy gets home, he sees that Jacob is with this girl, Sarah, who he interviewed at the school. And we knew Sarah was going to come back because they've been showing her a lot. We didn't really know why yet. But this gives Andy a little peace of mind and some hope that maybe he is right about his son because, oh, this makes my son look a little more normal. He's hanging out with a friend when he was going to storm in there, yell at him for talking to strangers playing Call of Duty. But when they talk about this at night, Jacob's a smart kid. He reads people well. And he's like, I think she's just doing it out of sympathy. I think she feels sorry for me, guilty, feels bad for believing stuff Derek said to her about Jacob. And he says Derek is obsessed with Sarah, and now she thinks he did it. This is huge. And that's why Andy also jumps up at this. A, because it could be an out for his son, and B, if Derek is obsessed with Sarah, it's more likely that he would want to paint a picture of someone else who could be competition like a Jacob badly and make up a story. And for her to say she thinks he did it means she knows much more and is getting signs about Derek that could only help Jacob's case of him not having murdered the young boy. Chris Evans, just even in this scene alone, is playing a man breaking down quickly, but being desperate to avoid breaking down really well. I just saw Snowpiercer in the movie for the first time recently, And that really also showed me how good of an actor Chris Evans is, so props to him. So the last thing we see in the future with the prosecutor with Andy, he was like, were you ever scared Jacob might have some of your father in him? And then look, he gets charged for stabbing. Worst fear finally realized. Another theme of this episode, just them all facing these fears they had bogged down about each other coming to the forefront. But you see, like I said before, Andy's like, I knew Jacob wasn't a murderer the way I wasn't. And this is interesting because then we're learning more about Andy through this process. How much is he like his father? What do we not know about him? And does he know Jacob more than anybody because he sees a lot of himself in Jacob? But you see, the prosecutor says Laurie was a different story. So it makes this really interesting, this future storyline, is we haven't seen Laurie yet. So we don't know in this timeline of events what ends up happening with Laurie, but it has to be complete opposites of Andy's situation we see him in this courtroom. That maybe she goes against Andy at some point or something darker. So we learn Joanna wants to get DNA from Andy and his dad as backup if Jacob is found guilty. If they find something to prove this idea of that Jacob has a murder gene and was kind of given this through his genetic coding, they could bring a case like this, if found guilty, down from life sentence to 20 years. But the catch is that the grandpa won't give his DNA unless it's Andy who asks for it. And now Andy has to do what he never wants to do, is talk to his father, faces demons here. And Laurie's like, oh no, you're doing it. You'll do it for Jacob, whatever it takes, using his line against him. But man, when I saw J.K. Simmons is playing the dad, I got chills. I had no idea he was even in this show. They hid that really well in the promotion of it. Props to Apple TV for keeping that a secret. That gets me really excited to see J.K. Simmons. He's a great actor and a huge player to add into this. So that is just something that will bring the ceiling up for this kind of show. So to me, this was the best episode yet. I'm going to give it an 8.8. Still moving at a slow clip, but it's doing a lot thematically and it's making you care about the characters, especially Laurie. And they've added a lot of mystery about everybody, so we'll see. It makes it very intriguing. Let me know what you thought of this episode down below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. I read every comment, try to respond as many as I can. Please make sure to subscribe so you don't miss one of my reviews of Defending Jacob. I'll be doing every episode. And I'll also be reviewing I Know This Much Is True, the new Mark Ruffalo show on HBO. I also do celebrity interviews. You want to check those out as well. And please follow me at SteveVarley1 on Twitter and Instagram for more of me. And I'll see you next time.